At thy feet, in the bonds of love we meet. Hear our voices we entreat. God defend our free land. Let us safely strip us out from the straps of strife and war. Make our praises burn apart. God defend New Zealand. So thank you, everyone. You can have a seat. Thank you so much for coming today, and thank you and welcome to all our viewers who are online with us today. It's just really lovely to be here. My name is Bernadette Soares, and I'm the candidate for Upper Harbour. I'm just so proud to represent New Conservative. It's been a wonderful journey over the last so many months, getting to know my new Conservative family. It's just been intriguing that, to get together with a group of people who have a common purpose, share the same passion, and have this energy and drive in them. So it's just been wonderful. I see Elliot here. Elliot, lovely to have you. Elliot is our deputy leader, so please make sure you say hello to him at some stage. And Elliot is a prime example. He's got this amazing passion, rubs up on everyone. So it's just wonderful to hear him. When you watch him on videos, even, it really rubs up on you. So just to give you a little bit of a background for those, many of you know me, I know. For those of you who don't know me, I came to New Zealand nearly 31 years ago. This November will be 31 years. And I've lived for 30 years of the 31 years in Upper Harbour. So what are my chances of living in one place? Because I think lots of Kiwis actually move houses, but many Indians actually don't move. So I'll just let you in a little secret. We love to stay in the same place. So we love the West. We've been here for such a long time. It's just ideal. It's got all the lovely motorways now. It connects us to every place in Auckland. All the shopping is here, which is important for me. My friends, my women friends will know that. And I managed to have 3 wonderful kids. My youngest boy, I just want to acknowledge him, Ruben, sorry. Oh, that's a bit of a standing joke in the family, and I can't believe I did it again. But my oldest boy is Gideon, and every time I go to say Ruben, for some reason I say Gideon, because they call Gideon my favorite son. But I can tell you I don't have a favorite son. So my youngest boy Ruben is here, and I'm really happy to have you, darling. My husband Clyde is here somewhere. He's doing all sorts of jobs. He's there behind, and thank you so much. And also, I want to acknowledge my wonderful team. I see so many of my wonderful team here in Upper Harbour. They've just done a fantastic job, just keeping me buoyant, keeping me on my toes, making sure I'm out every day doing what I need to do, keeping me accountable, and that's really important. So it's just been a great time. My children are now grown up and left home. Ruben is the only one with us. He was in Spain last year, but he's back because of COVID. So it's lovely having him. It's wonderful having him home with us. When I left India, I finished my degree in economics and commerce. And when I came to New Zealand, I looked for a job and had to work a few years before I had my children. While I was at home with my children, I went back to university and did my master's in business. So that was quite a journey to go back to studying again. But I was always very ambitious. I'm a really ambitious person. I always have big dreams. But in saying that, I have to tell you that being in politics or wanting to be an MP was never in my dreams. It was not something that I actually aspired to be, mainly because I used to always think, who the heck wants to be disrespected? Uh, and that's exactly how I saw politicians, unfortunately. I saw them as these people that worked hard. And yes, I know some of them do a few silly things, maybe a little bit more than few, but in general, people just disrespect them. And it was just one of those jobs I saw as does want to be disrespected. So I didn't really look at being a politician until last year. I got involved a couple of years before that into workplace bullying. So I met a couple of politicians and I met with MBIE and a couple of people. So that kind of, I suppose, set the spark going. And I just, I had this feeling, seeing how our country is going. And I think many of us, talking to people in the New Conservative team, seeing how our country is going, what's been happening, so many of our rights and freedoms have been lost, has really inspired us, many of us. So it's given me a real boost to get up and fight and to speak up and to really gain back our country, get back the things that we have lost. And of course, with the support of the team around me, it really keeps you going. So I'm very passionate about that. So why have I stood for New Conservative? A lot of people ask me that. I love the values that New Conservative have. So New Conservative, their prime pillars are right up here: family, justice, democracy, and community. And those four pillars have been, anyway, the pillars of my personal life. As we know that community, and especially in Upper Harbour, it's just a wonderful community. Community is everything. And if we don't look after our families, we don't actually have a great and strong community to start with. So family is a really important place for us in society, and something that we really have to look after. Coming back to democracy, we do have to, as you know, with COVID, it's changed a lot of things for us. It's made a lot of people actually sit up and look at what's going on. It's actually been, in some ways, really good for people to try and understand what's going on. A lot of people just carried on with their lives and actually didn't worry about politics, didn't worry what the government is doing, what restrictions were placed on people. So in some ways, COVID has been quite good. It's opened people's eyes. It's made people read up stuff. People didn't even know there was UN Agenda 21. They didn't know anything about UN Agenda 2030. But during this time, while we were locked away and just had our screens in front of us, it gave us time to look at these things. So it's been really good for that, for us and for our nation. Coming back to justice, I just want to quickly touch on something before I introduce you to Leighton. I was brought up in a wonderful family and a very supportive family. And my dad was a crown prosecutor in India. This was in India, which, in India, they call them public prosecutors. He was a criminal lawyer. And I think when I look back and me standing up now in politics, I realize how much that formed me as a person, formed me as my character, and also gave me that fight to really stand up and to be counted. So my dad, being a criminal lawyer and then a crown prosecutor, in India, as you know, the mafia is really strong, a little bit like Italy, but probably a little bit much more brutal, I would say. So when my dad had to, when he was, a crown prosecutor for some cases, he was often, they would come to our home with a briefcase full of money. And they would offer him the money and say to him, that was his if, the case went in their favor. And, my dad was like the calmest man ever. And that's what I've learned from him. He was just so calm, but he had a real fight in him when he had to fight. And he would tell them, he would be no uncertain terms that if they didn't pack up their bag and close the suitcase, he would personally kick them out of the house. And he did that time and time again. And so you can imagine that impression on us as children when we've seen that. when my dad would kick them out of the house time and time and again and was never touched by the money that was in that bag. They would come for our big festivals like Diwali and all in India and offer us big, massive boxes, expensive boxes of the sweets, the traditional sweets. They would offer us big bags of fireworks. And I'll tell you what, as kids, I was the youngest of 5. We used to sit down and just long that one day maybe Dad would say yes to one of those boxes of fireworks. And we'd say, what's wrong with the fireworks? The money we understood. Why can't you take the bag of fireworks or the big box of sweets? And he would say to them, there's always something behind it. So I can't take it because they'll expect something in return. And those sort of people, I don't have anything to give them in return. So just in honor of my dad is not here with us today. My dad actually just passed away in December last year. So it's really still quite fresh for me. It's still, I've thought of him so much during this campaign, just because he was such a pillar in my life, and it would have been so lovely to have him sitting here today. But what he has put in, the fire he's put in me, the integrity he's put in me, the love for the country. I know Dad has been living in New Zealand for the last 12 years. So just that love he put in me for the country, as he loved New Zealand. He loved India, but when he came here, he could see the freedom here. He could see how beautiful it was. He just loved living here. My mom sadly can't be with us today. My mom is in hospital care for the last 2-3 years. She's been suffering with dementia. So that's been a real sad journey for us as well. But all these things have really built me up into who I am. And I'm just grateful for my husband and my kids and the lovely team that I have. So I just want to really thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you do, not just for me, but for the party. I know how passionate you all are to see New Conservative in government. So just that if you are not aware of, New Conservative is actually sitting 65 candidates in the 65 candidates in the general seats and 7 in the Maori seats. Just I think last week they've managed to get all the seats covered. So it's just a wonderful sort of exposure. We've got some amazing candidates around the country. I'm just so proud to be associated with them. So thank you so much for coming again. I will just introduce Leighton and Sue. Sue, I just want to acknowledge you as well. Where's Sue? I haven't seen her. Oh, she's at the back. Sue, I just want to acknowledge you. I know they say behind every good man there is an awesome woman. And we can certainly say that for you. And Leighton's mom is here as well. She just came up and said hello to me. So thank you so much for coming. I just want to acknowledge her as well. So Leighton, I've got to know him only in the last few months, actually, really not very long. He just strikes me as just the most amazing, hardworking guy, full of integrity. He's been around to have a chat with when we needed a chat. He's been around for a good firm word when we needed a good firm word. It's just been wonderful to have him, and it's just so amazing when we have 2 awesome leaders who are leading from the front. It just makes our job so much easier. So Leighton, actually, he's an Aucklander, do you know? I mean, he pretends that he's a South Islander, but he's actually an Aucklander. He was born and brought up in Harwick, and he went to St. Kentigern's. I only found that out about 2 weeks ago when I saw it in a video, and I said, oh my God, this guy has been actually hiding it. So welcome, Leighton. I hope we've given you a really good welcome in Auckland since yesterday, and I hope you have a wonderful time. And I just want to really honor you for the amazing leadership that you've shown us, and we know that we will see you in government this year. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bernadette. I do have to put the record straight, though. I wasn't born in Howick, so I'm not trying to hide that I was in Auckland, but I was actually born in Lower Hutt, down by Wellington, and then my parents moved to Masterton. From Masterton, they took me down to Invercargill. I thought they were going to throw me off the bottom of the island, but they didn't. From there, we went to Rotorua, and I did all my primary schooling in Rotorua before we moved to Auckland. We were in Auckland at Fairwild, did my secondary schooling at St. Kitts, and then I left and I went up the far north to a wee place called Tararariki, which is just out of Te Koporu, which is just out of Dargaville, which is across the island from Whangarei. So there you go, bit of a geography lesson. I worked on a stud Romney farm there for a couple of years with this awesome guy, really lovely guy. So we'll be going back up there on Monday, back up to Dargaville to have a chat to them. Then I went back to Auckland. I did my carpentry apprenticeship in Auckland, and I got married to my lovely wife, Sue, and we had a couple of children in Auckland. And then I thought to myself, I need a free babysitter. And so decided we'd move back down to Canterbury where her parents were. So we moved back down and we had number 3, and her dad said to us, if you have any more, we're leaving. She still had another one, and they left. So there was our free babysitters gone. But we've only been down there 28, 29 years, so we're not a local yet. And she was on the West Coast, and we're talking to the West Coast, and we said, how do you know you're a local on the West Coast? And they said, when the last person that remembers you shifting here has died. I think it might be the same in Canterbury. Hey, but I'm really proud to be the leader of New Conservative, mainly because of the people that have got involved. Really great quality people. I mean, you've met Bernadette tonight. She's doing an amazing job with a great team around her, just passionate about New Zealand. Mentioned Elliot Ikeley. When I think of Elliot, does anyone know what PRC stands for? People's Republic of China. It could do, but actually, when I think of Elliot, it signifies what Elliot is. P for passionate. If you want to meet a passionate person, go and have a chat to Elliot. He's passionate. He's passionate about the people of New Zealand. He's passionate about his family and about helping people, and that's fantastic. And then when you think of R, you think of real. You know, when you talk to Elliot, what you see is what you get. He is real. And that is such a refreshment today. It's not someone putting on airs. He's not pretending to be something he isn't. He is real. And then C is he's courageous. And I don't know if you've seen some of his interviews he's done with people, but he has courage. He'll stand up to whatever bullies throw at him. And that is such a good thing, because what that does is instills courage in other people. I honour you for that. You do a great job. So it's people like him. It's people like that that have joined the party that is making it the success it is, because there are no career politicians. We're a party of passionate Kiwis that love this nation, and we want it to succeed. We want the people in this nation to succeed. And we understand that some of the rules and legislation that's been brought into New Zealand does the exact opposite. It's condemning people to poverty. You know, dependency always leads to poverty. It just does. So when we create dependency, we create poverty. We don't eliminate it. And so if we want to get rid of poverty, we've actually got to eliminate dependency. We've got to encourage people and enable people to stand on their own 2 feet. We've got to equip them. We've actually got to give them a hand up, not a hand out. Because it's actually, equality of outcome doesn't work. If equality of outcome worked, I'd be an All Black. And then we'd never win a game, okay? Equality of outcome doesn't work because it does not reward effort. And you have to reward effort. When you reward effort, people put more in. You get greater achievement, and everyone does better. When you stop rewarding effort, people don't achieve. And when they don't achieve, we all suffer because we have a least productivity in our nation. So encouraging effort, rewarding effort, inspiring people to achieve more has got to be a key for good governance. And it's got to be a key for us recovering from the COVID, because we cannot recover unless we have income. And as a nation, I think we've seen a whole lot of negative effects with mass debt over New Zealand. And once you've got a massive debt, you actually have to generate a good income to service that debt, don't you? So as a nation, for us as a nation, how do we recover from COVID? We must use the resources here in New Zealand. You know, when I talk about the resources in New Zealand, I'm talking about the human resources. And one of those got to be our farmers. Well, there's only about 13,000 farming families in New Zealand, yet they bring in about 30% of our income. We should not be harassing them and oppressing them. We should be supporting and encouraging them. Yes, they are not perfect, but none are even you. But they are working really, really, really hard. Do you know our farmers have put in about 30,000 kilometres of fencing around waterways, paid for out of their own pockets? They've planted over 6 million native plants around waterways, paid for out of their own pockets. They produce enough food for 40 million people worldwide, and yet we're a nation of only 5 million. Our farmers do an amazing job. So what we're saying as a party, instead of putting more regulation and more red tape and restricting them, we need to invest in the farming community. We need to invest in research and development to actually help them farm better. Yeah, they're trying hard. Yes, they're doing a great job, but they could do better. So regenerative farming, improving soil health, actually helping them with the issues. That's what we need to do as a nation, because then they will produce more, we will get more money in, we will be better off. And actually, when you look at farming, one thing that the government's doing at the moment is its Billions Trees program. The trouble with planting a whole lot of pine trees is if you do it for the value of the pine, that's okay, but we're not. We're planting pine trees across New Zealand for the value of the carbon credits. Now, if we went carbon zero tomorrow, we would make no discernible difference to the world's environment. So is that good governance for a small island nation? Is that the right way for us to go? So with our carbon credits, we're actually incentivising international companies to buy New Zealand land and plant pine trees. That's not good governance, especially if the pine trees aren't actually worth the pine. Now, I'm a builder, so I work with pine just about every day. And so planting for the value of the pine is fine, but we may not ever harvest all these pine trees we're planting because they're planted for the carbon credits. If you chop them down, you have to give that money back. No one's going to do that. And if they do, they must replant. So that means it's only a 30-year cycle until they're valueless. And the trouble is when you cover good farmland with pine trees, you're no longer farming it. When you're no longer farming it, you no longer have the income coming off it, but you don't have the work that's associated with that land. So it's not just the farmers. It's the shearers or the irrigators or the milkers or the fencers. It's the people driving the trucks to and from it. And it's all the service industries in the local towns. It's the local schools. It's the local banks that'll shut it, or the doctors that'll leave. So when we cover good farmland and pine trees, we not only destroy the land, but we actually destroy the rural communities. I don't believe that's good governance. I don't believe that should be the future of New Zealand. And so we're saying, actually, pull out of the ETS. Do away with the Paris Accord and actually invest money in pollution solutions in New Zealand. Actually target actual pollution and come up with solutions for it. It's already been done in New Zealand, some of it. I was reading recently about these guys that have developed a filter that they put on smokestacks where they burn coal. And what it does, it takes the particulates out and then it turns it into jet fuel. Now that technology was developed here in New Zealand. It's now being used in the States because it works. And that's a way we can actually change the world for good. That's a way we can reduce pollution. That's one example. There's so many more because we're a creative country. We really are. Years ago, like I said, I used to live in Auckland and I did my apprenticeship here, and so I got a work van. And I got it all signed, written up. And I had myself one of those cell phones the size of a brick. You guys remember those? Yeah, no data, no maps, no Google. You wouldn't even know how to use it, Elliot. Mine didn't even store phone numbers, actually. You just had to remember them. But I thought I was pretty cool. And then because we shifted down to Christchurch to be with family, as a builder, I sort of lost my work contact. So I had to work for other people. And then the guy I was working with, he said a friend was going to come help him. This guy rocks up, and he didn't have a nice sign-written van. He had this cruddy little car, and he didn't have a cell phone the size of a brick, and he didn't even have a Pasload nail gun. And he spoke really slowly. "G'day, mate." And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, it's the Beverly Hillbillies. You know, he'll have an axe and a chainsaw. But I was so wrong. All he had in the back of his car was a massive slice of humble pie. And he let me have the whole lot. Because when I got talking to him, this guy had helped build the Britain motorbike. Any of you guys seen that? That's not just a motorbike, it's a work of art, isn't it? You look at it and go, oh, I'd love to go for a squirt in it, but I'd kill myself. But anyway, he'd worked on the Britain motorbike. When the Britain motorbike got leased to Germany, he went with it because he's the one that could download the computer information. We worked for a while, then I didn't see him for a while. When I caught up with him again, he was actually working on the Martin jetpack. So who was the idiot? You don't have to say, because it would be rude. I only tell you that because New Zealand is full of really creative people like that. I mean, we're sending rockets into space, for crying out loud. We're this tiny little island nation. There's only 5 million of us. There's more people live in Sydney. And yet we're sending rockets into outer space. Why? Because we've got creative people, and we have a nation here when you can try something new. You can have a go. You can be creative. And I think that's so awesome, and that's what we need to encourage. We need to encourage and use our human resources, our creativity. So instead of spending billions of dollars on carbon credits, let's invest it in research and development in New Zealand and encourage people to find their dreams. How many people here have had a cunning plan? Something they want to build or develop? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. I reckon it's probably just about everyone. And we all do. I've had a few cunning plans. I've told people before about my cunning plan of headstones actually being video screens. And so when you go to the cemetery, instead of just looking at a tombstone saying, "Here lies Leighton Baker," you can push a button and see a wee video. Wouldn't that be cool? Actually see the person. I thought that was a great idea. Never did anything with it. I had another one. I thought dome houses, wouldn't they be great for relief? Because domes are really, really strong, really wind resistant and really strong. So I thought a 2-part dome house made out of like insulated fiberglass, stored in halves. You could ship it anywhere really quick, open up, put it together, coach bolts around the side. You've got a dome house, a couple of screws to hold it down into sand or whatever. Isn't that an awesome idea? If anyone wants to build some, I've just given you the plan. I've got the details in here. Why am I telling you that? Because so many of us have great ideas. And wouldn't it be awesome if there was a place we could easily go to access people that would say to us, you are a dropkick, that is never going to work. Or say to us, that's a great idea, here's a few $1,000, go and develop it or try one or make a prototype and see if it works. Because it's that creativity, that ingenuity that we need to spark up in New Zealand for us to recover from COVID. Yep. And we also need to use our physical resources. So what's that? Well, at the moment, do you know that we actually burn coal? Shock horror, we do. Our steel is made in New Zealand burning coal. A lot of our milk powder in New Zealand is dried burning coal. Some hospitals in New Zealand are still heated with coal. Some schools still with coal. So if we're going to use coal, use ours. Because if we refuse to use ours but buy it in from offshore, that money goes offshore. It's not circulating around in New Zealand. It's not paying people's wages in New Zealand. It's not buying trucks and diggers and excavators in New Zealand. It's not supporting local communities. It's gone. It's offshore. We're not getting tax off it because it's gone. So use our resources here in New Zealand. Whether it's hydrocarbons or coal, use ours. If we're not using any, that's a different story. But when we say we're clean and green because we're not getting it out of the ground, but we're buying it off someone else, guess where they're getting it from? Okay? And that's a NIMBY thing. If we're going to use it, use ours. I think it's Finland that's one of the richest nations in the world per head of population. Why? Because they use their natural resources. If we're going to recover from COVID, we need to use those natural resources. And we need to source things from New Zealand, don't we? There's a contract out for $2 billion, I think it is, for trains and engines in New Zealand, trains and engines for toll rail. We've bought them before from offshore, but actually we have the capability and the capacity to do it here in New Zealand. If we do it in New Zealand, the money goes round and round in New Zealand. We get tax off it. It goes to the local supermarket, the local dairy, the local garage. It supports local sub-trades and suppliers. It goes round and round and round in New Zealand. If we spend it offshore, it's disappeared. We need that money here. So the government needs to source as much as it can from New Zealand to help us recovery, because we need that finance here. It's a massive debt. COVID's not the only issue we face, though, is it? You know, I didn't get into politics because of COVID. It was never around back then, okay? I got involved in politics because of democracy. And why is democracy important to me? A young guy asked me this question in Morrinsville a couple of weeks ago. He said to me, Leighton, what is more important to you, freedom or safety? So I'm asking you guys, you don't have to yell out, but think to yourself, what's more important to you? Freedom. Yeah, I'd say so, freedom. But we don't have to choose between the two, do we? Because actually life is about finding a road between the two that suits us best. So for me, absolute freedom doesn't work, because absolute freedom is anarchy. Absolute freedom is everyone driving it whatever way they feel like on the roads, and that would just kill us, okay? So absolute freedom does not work, but absolute safety doesn't work either. We've had a little bit of it with lockdown, but absolute safety is like a caged hen. You're locked in the cage and you're drip fed the nutrients you need to survive. We don't want to live like that. No one wants to. So democracy allows us to discuss and debate and argue to find a place that we think best suits us as a nation. But without that democracy, we lose our freedom, because without democracy, someone will tell us what we're going to do. Someone will dictate to us how we must live. And I don't think New Zealanders want that. I think that's why people immigrate here. They come here because they want the freedom. They want the lifestyle. They want the choice that we have in New Zealand. We need to look after that. We need to fight for our democracy. You may say to me, well, Leighton, how's it being eroded? We've got an election this year. That's democracy, isn't it? Yeah, sort of. The democracy we have at the moment is a bit like a diet that you do one day a month, okay? The rest of the time you do whatever you feel like. We get to vote every 3 years, but within the next 3 years, we will have very little control over the government. They can basically do whatever they want, and they have done. So back in, I think it was 92, the government introduced a law called the CIR, Citizens Initiated Referenda Law, which was meant to give you and I, citizens, the ability to control the government between elections. At the time, it was suggested that they should make it binding. And the comment, well, no, you don't have to make it binding. No government would be foolish enough to ignore the will of the people. How many citizens-initiated referenda has any New Zealand government honoured? Zero. Here's the big point with it. Every single one of those referendums that has gone to the vote in New Zealand, the citizens-initiated referendums, has had more than 67% support. Every single one. Can you tell me a government in New Zealand or a Prime Minister in New Zealand that's had more than 67% support? None. Our Prime Minister in the moment did not have 67% support to become Prime Minister. And yet when we give the government a clear instruction that we want them to do something, they have ignored us every single time. How is that democracy? I'm a builder. All I do is exchange my time for other people's money. But in return, I have to do what they ask me to do. I can't do whatever I feel like, okay? So Bernadette invites me around to her house and says she wants me to do up her kitchen, and I get there and I say, man, it's a beautiful day in Auckland today. I think I'll do a deck. So I go to Clyde's perfectly manicured lawn that he spends hours on his hands and knees digging out every weed and planting worms, and I dig holes all through it, and I concrete in little posts for this deck. And they get home from work, and instead of their bathroom being done up, their lawn is ruined. They'll kick me off the property. They'll get very angry. In fact, Bernadette might ask for a car back that I've lent for the week. Because I have not fulfilled my obligations to them. They're paying me to do what they want. And we pay our politicians to do what we want. We ask them to represent us in Parliament. That's why they don't have to have any skills. I'm not saying they don't have any, but they don't have to have... Okay, we won't get into trouble here. They don't have to have any qualifications. They don't have to have a trade cert. They don't have to have a degree or a diploma. They do not even have to have level 1 NCEA credits. That's school cert. Why? Because we're simply asking them to represent us in Parliament. That's all we're asking them to do. And for me personally, when I'm paying them to represent me and they totally ignore me, I want my money back. I want my money back because they are not fulfilling their obligation that they have to me. And that's why I got involved in politics. I said, this has got to stop. The government must actually fulfill its obligation to the people by listening to the people. Citizens-initiated referendum must be binding. Unfortunately, we can't trust the government to honour what they say they're going to do. So that's one of our big policies. When you see democracy there, it's because democracy is so important. It's not just because I want to tell the government what to do. It's our democracy is what gives us our freedom. The first freedom we lose is freedom of speech. And that is actually being attacked at the moment. I don't know if you guys recognise that. Freedom of speech is being attacked at the moment. People are saying it's hate speech if you offend them. If I offend you, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend you, but it doesn't mean I hate you. And hopefully it means you don't hate me. We just may disagree. And we probably would disagree. If I sat down with every single one of you and had a one-on-one for an hour, there's something we would disagree on. And maybe you might not think the Crusaders are the best rugby team in New Zealand. I mean, poor fool you. But anyway, there will be things we disagree on. But because we disagree does not mean we hate each other. And I'm really concerned that they're bringing in laws now that say, if you offend me, then that is hate speech and you can't use it. No. We must be allowed the full range of freedom of speech to be able to discuss and debate and come to solutions and find out where that line is for us as a nation. I'm pretty happy we've got a couple of referendums coming up this year. I'm just a bit sad at the way they've been worded. Sort of weasel words, if you look at the wording of the referendums, they're not really asking you if you want to legitimise either the smoking of THC or euthanasia. They're just asking if you want the laws they've already written to become law, which means if you say no, they can still bring it in under a different law. But anyway, if we look at the topics, we've said tonight, didn't we, that we're going to talk a bit about euthanasia. So New Conservative is the one party that's come out really strong saying we don't support euthanasia or the End of Life Choices Bill. I just want to tell you why. It's because good law is really easy to define and easy to uphold. So good law is what we have at the moment when it is not legal for you to take your own life. That is illegal in New Zealand. That is easy to understand, easy to uphold. What the End of Life Choices Bill or the Euthanasia Bill brings in, it brings in a word called unless. Unless you're terminally ill and you're going to die in 3 months and 2 doctors will certify you. But once you bring in that unless word, it will continually be challenged. And the evidence of that is not just here in New Zealand, it's also worldwide. In Belgium, I think they started with 4 people seeking euthanasia a month. Now it's up to about 40. I think the youngest person that's asked for it is 11. In New Zealand, our previous abortion law was brought in so that it was a stopgap if there was hazard to the woman's health or life. got up to 18,000 abortions in New Zealand a year. The government admitted that a lot of them were being done illegally, but they didn't do anything about it. So once you bring in a law like that, it will be challenged. Someone will say, well, I've only got 6 months to live. I've only got a year to live. Well, I'm not terminally ill, I just don't want to live. And the trouble is, if you open that door to it, what is the long-term consequence? The long-term consequence, I think, and I believe quite sincerely, that vulnerable people will be terminated. And by vulnerable people, I mean either the elderly through elder abuse. Bad news in New Zealand, we have a lot of elder abuse. And also the disabled. I spoke at a select committee hearing on the euthanasia bill, and the disabled, I'm not sure if it was the commissioner or the disabled community, I can't quite remember, so I better not say who it was. They were speaking, and they were saying, please do not introduce this law, it scares our members, because they know the pressure they'll be put under. They will be told, oh, actually, you're a bit of a burden, you're hard work, it would be so much easier to end your life. And what does it say about us as a community? Who are we as a nation if we decide we want to terminate people simply because they're a bit extra work, or they're disabled, or they're not as perfect as we are? Who determines what perfect is? What do we say about us as a community when we say to our elderly, actually just end your life, you've had a good enough innings, you can top yourself now and leave space for someone else? What does that actually say about who we are as human beings? You know, for me, politics is about making people important again. I want people to feel valued in New Zealand. I did 6.5 years as a trade tutor, and I was asked to by a group of guys who saw a lot of young people on the street down in North Canterbury where I live, young people that were getting into trouble. They dropped out of school, they didn't want to school, they were getting into trouble, so they started a private trust. And they asked me to be a trade tutor on it, which I didn't really want to do at the time because I'm a bit task-orientated. Are there any other tradies here? When you're a self-employed tradie, it's like you get up in the morning, you know exactly what you want to get done by the end of the day, all right? And don't get in my road. My wife knows that, don't you, Chick? Sorry. I just got to get this done today. But I went and did it. And what I discovered is those young people that were getting into trouble and making mischief and that, they weren't actually all ratbags. They were just young people that didn't know where they fitted in. And because they didn't fit into the school system, they were getting into trouble. And the progression for them was going to get worse and worse trouble and be locked up. But the intervention was actually not teaching them to be builders, because most of them didn't become builders. The intervention was saying to those young people, you have a purpose, we need you. You have got skills that can be used. You are valuable. That's what we really said to them. 95% success rate. We need to make people feel valuable in New Zealand. Euthanasia doesn't make people feel valuable. Abortion doesn't make people valuable. We were talking to a couple a few weeks ago, and they've lost 2 children to cystic fibrosis. The last one was just last year. She was 21 years old. And she said to her parents before she died, she said, whatever you do, do not support a party that supports further abortion. She says, because abortion says to me, I have no value. Abortion says to me that someone can test and find out that you have cystic fibrosis and terminate you and not let you have a chance to live. Why should I have no opportunity to live? And I agree with that. You know, that's one reason why I'm actually against this, the new abortion law. It takes the human rights off people, and I don't want that. I want us a community that values people and not takes the human rights off them. I want the voters made important again. I want our vote to count. I want the parliament and our politicians to respect us as voters. I want us as taxpayers being important again. When the government thinks it's okay to spend $572,000 on a slide, $180,000 of that on consultants for a slide, when they think that's okay and just spending of taxpayers' money, they are not on the right planet. When they think they can spend millions of dollars on advice on how to present COVID to us, that is an insult to every taxpayer in New Zealand. I work hard for my money. I don't mind paying my tax, but I want it spent respectfully. I want it spent wisely. I don't want it wasted and squandered for no good reason. So I want taxpayers treated important again. I want our elderly treated as important again. I want our farmers treated as important again. We're in the Northland Field days, and it was a shame that farmers were coming in embarrassed to say they were farmers because they've been vilified so much in the media. What's that about? These are people that work so hard in New Zealand. They pay their tax. They look after themselves, they look after their families, and they've been vilified by the media as something of destroying the world. How many of you guys like eating? Yeah, I enjoy it. A lot of it, okay? We need to value them and tell them you're important and help them, not hinder them. So I don't want to go on all night. I just want to tell you, New Conservative is a party of passionate Kiwis that love this nation. We do want to see it succeed. We come from a wide range of schools. We're not in it for the glory. We're not in it for the money. We're simply in it for the people of New Zealand. We want people to do better in New Zealand. We want us to have our freedom. We want our democracy protected. We want our taxes respected. And we want the people of New Zealand to be proud to be New Zealanders, proud to be in this fantastic nation, and recognise what an absolute privilege it is to live here. So, hey, thank you so much for your time tonight. And I will take questions. I think there's questions up there. What's that? A quick break? Yeah. No way. No, it's a quick break. Democracy, you're going to vote. Yeah.
Okay. Well, before we take the questions, just a quick commercial break. The bar is open, so if you can please support the bar and put your orders through there. The kitchen, Jamie told me that it's still got some time. They've got burgers and pizzas on the menu, so you can also put in an order through there. And as we collect the questions, I just want to say on the topic of burgers, my first job in New Zealand was making burgers. In South Africa, I was an insurance broker, financial advisor, accountant, because that's what we Indians do very well, taxes. You give us a calculator, we do your taxes. You know what I mean? You got an MBA, Masters in Business. And the challenge was that I sold my business in South Africa, I'd come over to New Zealand, live off the interest while I studied to be a teacher. So I also qualified as a teacher in New Zealand. Good plan, Leighton, but one small problem. The guys that bought the business didn't pay me. So I end up I'm in New Zealand, first job is making burgers. And you talk about opportunity and you talk about what New Zealand offers us in terms of freedom of choice. And that's what it was. That was my first job in New Zealand, making those Whoppers and Junior Whoppers and all of that there. But I didn't stay there. And the thing is, you know, coming from South Africa and with that mindset of inferiority because you're not good enough, my challenge was, am I Indian or am I South African? And then I come to New Zealand now, so am I Kiwi as well, you know? And on a marae in Pukekohe in 2001, I'm sitting there, and the Kauma tour asked us, all the students on the teacher course, to bring a greeting in our mother tongue. And I said to him, hey, bro, I don't speak any Indian. And then he says, he knows a little bit about South Africa, because every one of us in South Africa, whether we liked it or not, had to learn Afrikaans. He said, no, but I know you speak Afrikaans. Now, see, the thing is, I was brought up with the mentality that Afrikaans is evil, and rugby was evil as well for us, because we weren't allowed to play rugby for obvious reasons. And what he does is that he gets a Bible, he opens up the Bible, and he reads to me, every knee shall bow and every tongue confess. And then he challenges me, and he says, well, how can you say that every language is evil? And immediately at that time, I believe the scales were lifted. And for the first time in my life, on a marae in Pukekohe, I brought a greeting in Afrikaans, because we learned it in school. And guess what sport the guys were playing in Pukekohe? For the first time, I passed a rugby ball in my life. Now, I make a joke about being an Indian, half black, coming to New Zealand, I became all black. And you won't believe it, what happened. But because of that mindset being changed and looking at rugby and Afrikaans not as something negative. And you speak about, and I love it, not about giving people a handout, but giving them a handout. And that's what New Zealand has given for me as a migrant coming to New Zealand. Because, for me as a life coach, I say this often. People ask me, what do you do? And I said, very simply, I give people a checkup from the neck up to eliminate stinking thinking. And that's what has happened today in society. To give you a quick précis on what happened, a few years later, from 2001, in West Auckland, I get invited to a friend's house, and also an Indian friend of mine, but from Fiji. And he said, hey, I want to introduce you to my brother-in-law. So I'm like, okay, his brother-in-law, not another Indian guy, And I meet this guy, a big bloke, and he said, hey, South Africa, you know what, I played in South Africa. I'm like, what did you play? Music? No, I played rugby. I'm like, oh. What did you know? We were part of the first All Blacks to play in '92 when the All Blacks got readmitted back to play in South Africa. And I ended up writing his autobiography in 2009. Inga the Winger Tuigamala. You may know him? Yeah? Now, this will let you know, when I wrote the book in 2009, he wasn't Inga the Winger because he owned a funeral undertaking business in Henderson. So we coined the phrase. He's no longer Inga the Winger, but he's Inga the last man to let you down. And the thing is, what I love about this whole thing is that in Pukekohe on the marae, I found my Turanga Waiwai, my place of belonging. And that's something that I was able to write and go back to South Africa in 2012 I was able to take that to the Springboks and the Lions rugby team. If you know Super Rugby, they were the worst team in Super Rugby, always the wooden spooners. And they were so desperate because John Mitchell was the coach, Carlos Spencer was the coach, and they got sacked, and the new coaches came in, Johan Ackerman and Soares Brain. And they were desperate. They were so desperate that they brought in a mental coach, an Indian guy who's never played a game of rugby in his life, to motivate them. But I went there with what New Zealand gave me, that sense of mana, that sense of Toronto YY. And I said to them, guys, you know what? You may be down and out, but I want you to answer this question. Why did you start playing rugby? And you know, that's a question that I see you really answered that in terms of what is it being a Kiwi? It's about standing up for that freedom that we take for granted. You know, in South Africa, we've got a saying, a farmer always makes a plan. And I wrote a book in Afrikaans where I said, a farmer always makes a plan, but you need an Indian to sell it, you know? And New Zealand's equivalent, I think that's why you got Bernadette as well. Yeah. New Zealand's equivalent I've learned is, you know, DIY, number 8 wire mentality. And that's the Kiwi ingenuity that you spoke about. You know, the Britain bike, if you know about it, the famous New Zealand rider, Andrew Stroud, and he's probably watching live on the Facebook. Andrew was the guy that really took the Britain bike overseas, and they were absolutely amazing. You know, they beat all the major manufacturers, the Kawasaki's, the Yamahas, the Hondas, and all of that. And that came through, you know, the Kiwi ingenuity. Now, you spoke about bikes, and I've spoken about Indians. I cannot miss the opportunity to tell you about the world's fastest Indian. You know, we call it a motorbike, but there's it here, Bernadette, you know. Yeah. And are we ready with the questions? Are we getting ready with the questions? Because I think it's important to understand as well that that mindset has to change in terms of, you know, you may be living in poverty, but never let poverty live in you. And that's the message that I get in terms of what attracts me to the party values, family, justice, and all of that. Because for too long, if you tell people you're not good enough, then they're going to start to believe that. You know, I became a tutor after qualifying as a teacher. I became a tutor to a private tertiary institute. And I had people coming there that had to be on that course because they were beneficiaries. So again, you speak about the genius and the excellence of government. And they came up with this plan that you were not going to get the benefit until you went onto this course. So I had people coming on this course that didn't want to be there. You know, and because of that lack of motivation, that's where that mindset had to change. To get them to understand that exactly what you spoke about, that, you know, that appreciation, that Kiwi ingenuity has got to come from within to give them the motivation. So if we're ready, Bernadette, you want to pose the questions?
Oh, no, we'll have to ask anyone who has questions.
So we haven't got anything through on the text because you probably can't see it as well from there, but I'll just pass the mic around if there's anyone who wants to ask Leighton anything. Yeah, that's awesome. I'll just hold out to pass the mic.
If it's a really hard question, I'll ask Elliot. Yeah.
Hey, good evening. So my question, forgive me, I'm very long-winded asking questions, so this might take a while. So my question is really, I like what you're doing with this, with your, what do you call it, with your party. Like, I like what you stand for, and I'm really appreciative. But unfortunately, like, my opinion at the moment is, from my point of view, I don't know why anyone else, if I don't want to get stones thrown at me, but I don't want the Labour getting into Parliament again. I'm not being a fan of just simply passing bills during lockdown. Some of you guys might know it. Choosing passing bills, and the people haven't really had a vote on any of this, which is another thing you've been talking about. And I want you to sell me your party away, because at the moment, I love what you're doing. I would love to vote for you, but my main priority is making sure Labour doesn't get in again. And as far as I'm concerned, the best way to do that is to vote for National, because as it goes, it's either one of the two big parties. Like in the past, of like trying to go for small parties, saying New Zealand first, and we saw that happen last election. So my question to you is really, what guarantees do I have that I know voting for you, the more votes we get for you, the more chance you have more people in Parliament stuff. But as a smaller party member, or a smaller part of Parliament, how will you be able to like influence and make sure that these multiple policies that we want you to get into Parliament, how can we make sure that the bigger parties don't overpower you with their bigger sides and stuff like that? Like, I want you to sell to me why I shouldn't vote for National or why I should vote for New Conservative.
Okay.
I want to vote for you, but I don't know exactly how the rule. As you said earlier, we want our votes to count and stuff like that. And I want it to count for something good.
Okay.
I also want to make sure that it doesn't go to something that isn't going to make a big enough difference.
Okay, I'll do my sales pitch. Yeah. The good news is if we get 51%, we don't have to go in coalition. The reality is last year News Hub did a poll, and that poll showed that there was 35% of New Zealanders that were keen to vote for a Conservative style party. 35%. So the only reason we won't get that percentage is people think that it's a wasted vote. The reason that I think a wasted vote is when you don't vote for what you truly believe in. And because even if you get what you voted for, it's not what you really wanted. So National and Labor at the moment, did National support the Firearms Amendment Act? Yes, they did. Did a lot of National vote for the abortion reform? Yes, they did. Did National support the zero carbon bill? Yes, they did. So how big a difference is there between National and Labor? I'll give you an example. Labor come in and they tend to move a little bit to the left, okay? When National come in, they come into this spot. They don't usually take us anywhere back towards the right of centre. They stay here, maintain the spot. When Labor come back in, they move even further to the left. National come back, they stay here. And now we have National and Labor so far over to the left that someone like myself that says, actually, you should work for your living, support your family, pay your taxes, not bludge off the government, obey the law, and treat everyone with respect. I'm called an extreme right-winger. I can only be that if these guys have moved so far over to the left. So my challenge to everyone is, don't vote anyone out of Parliament. When you vote someone out, you simply leave a void on that chair. Who's going to fill it? What do they believe? What do they stand for? When you vote this year, you've got to vote for the party that has the values that you have, that has the vision that you can buy into, and has the people that you believe will deliver. Because when you vote for that, your vote counts. You are sending a clear message of what you really want. So your choice is, do I vote for convenience and not get what I want, or do I vote for what I really want? Do I stand up for what I believe in, and do I change this nation for good? That's your choice. I get 2 ticks just like the rest of you. You've got to make your vote count. And we're providing you with an opportunity. We're providing you with different policies, with fresh thinking, with new ideas. You can either vote for the same old and get the same result, or you vote for something new and get something fresh. That's what we are.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Leighton. My name is Joseph. I worked at the airport for 30 years, and after that I did voluntary work in prisons. And I've got a question related to that. It came to my ear, and I have to be honest, I don't know whether I read it or saw it on advertising or whatever, but I believe that New Conservative wanted to extend prison sentences. I don't know if that's right or where it comes from or how that's based, but for the 9 years I've been volunteering in that environment, I came in, I used my voice to do it, or lose my voice, so I came in like this. And after 9 years, I came out like that. And I've got a quite a passionate view about it, and I just wonder, in the second point there of justice, what your thoughts are about that.
Awesome. Great question. Thank you so much. I really love our justice policy, to tell you the truth, because what we're trying to do with our justice policy is identify causation. So we're top of cliff type people. As a builder, most of my work is actually problem solving. So when we look at the justice issue, the first thing we've got to say is, what's a common denominator for those people that are in the justice system? What's a causality for people to find themselves on the wrong side of the law? And what we find, if we look at virtually every single person incarcerated, is they come from a broken family. And look, my parents split up when I was a teenager, okay? So I know what it's like. And I'm not saying that every person from a broken family goes to prison, but what we're seeing is so many people that are incarcerated in New Zealand prisons come from a broken family. So if we want to reduce prison population, we've got to understand that. Because if we don't actually do anything to deal with that, we are still going to get the same results later on. We're going to have to build more prisons or legalise everything. Because if we legalise everything, there's no crime, right? No crime, we don't need prisons, okay? I don't think that's a great solution. But what I do think we need to do is we need to address this whole thing of broken relationships. Because broken families are just broken relationships. And I think too often we're not concentrating and teaching our young people, what does a good relationship look like? What are the tools you need in your toolbox for a good relationship? You know, so often in our health syllabus in schools, we're talking all about sex. I got bad news for you, maybe good news for you. Sex is not part of virtually every single relationship you have. Sex is one part of one relationship. I have relationships with my sub-trades, with my suppliers, with my apprentices, with the people I work for. None of them involve sex. But we're talking so often to our young people about sex as part of their health syllabus and relationships. No, it's not. What is part of a healthy relationship? It's commitment. That's part of a good relationship. And that doesn't matter if it's with my spouse or with the guy I buy my materials off or with my apprentices. I'm committed to them. I want them to succeed. That's part of a healthy relationship. Communication is really important. You must communicate clearly. You know, so many relationships fall over because we just don't communicate well. Communication is a skill we need to learn, particularly blokes, okay? For a bloke, a grunt can mean about 98 different things, okay? For a woman, they're slightly more detailed. But we need to learn communication. But I think the biggest thing that we're not teaching our young people, and I think this is where we're falling down, is we're not teaching people that in any healthy relationship, whether it's your spouse or your friends or the people you work with, there's an element of self-sacrifice. There's an element there where you've got to put yourself last. But so much of our teaching in schools at the moment is about your rights, what you deserve, what you should get, what you're entitled to. No, that's a failure. That doesn't work. Instead of telling people that life is about what they should get and what they deserve and what they need, we need to be telling people you have a window of opportunity in your life. You have a small window of opportunity during your lifespan to make a positive influence on other people. Change their mindset. Because I tell you what, how do you get fulfillment in life? It's when you help someone else. I heard a fantastic wee story. We got a letter written to us this week about one of our candidates who was standing in the line at a supermarket. The lady in front of him wrote this letter to us saying, I went to the supermarket. I didn't have enough money to pay for my groceries. This lovely young man behind me said, I'll pay for that. He paid for it and carried the groceries to my car. How good did he feel? It cost him money, it cost him time, but how good did he feel helping someone else? And when we can teach people that actually self-sacrifice gives you more rewards than self-seeking, we will change the way people think. So the first part of our justice policy is actually teaching healthy relationships. It's not a silver bullet. It won't solve them all, but it's the first part in trying to reduce crime. The second part is actually investing in the government department most effective at reducing crime. It's the education department. We believe bring in trade training at year 9. Year 9's third form. Why? Because there's a lot of young people that just don't enjoy sitting in a classroom learning stuff. It's just not the way they learn. And so they're often kicked out for being stupid or disruptive or failures. But it's not true. They're essential. They're the creators. They're innovators. They need to be shown and given tools to succeed. Trade training at year 9 tells them you're valuable, you're important. How about you try this? Let them sample some different trades. They might try electrical or hairdressing or cooking or building or plumbing or drain laying, whatever. As they go through their years, towards the end, they specialise in the trade of their choice. So when they finish their schooling at year 12 or 13, they've got their driver's licence. They've got their first aid certificate. They've got a basic knowledge of the trade they want to do. And they can actually go out there and be useful for their employer. You've actually given them value. And if you can keep young people involved in education, you will reduce crime. So now part 2 of our justice policy is actually trade training at year 9. Third part of our justice policy is youth farms. Youth farms are getting young people that already are in the justice system. These are young people that are living on the streets, that have already come from a broken relationship probably, that are struggling with drugs or alcohol or sex addictions. These are the people that need a lot of help. And it's giving them an opportunity to get out of that situation for a year and be totally different. They might try agriculture or horticulture, viticulture, animal husbandry, work on a farm, grow their own veggies, grow their own food, look after their own sleeping accommodation. But the biggest thing you're doing is you're separating them from that connection to the drugs and to the pimps. You're giving them a fresh taste of life. Again, it's no silver bullet, but it will positively change those young people. Who's that written by? It's written by people like Elliot, who's worked for 15 years with the young people in the streets of South Auckland. Who would know what they need? It's someone that's worked on the front line. It's not theoretical, it's practical, it's real. And then when people do find themselves incarcerated in prison, I think it's the obligation for us as society to provide them with every single tool we can to help them rehabilitate well. But it's also a responsibility that they have to want to change. You can't make people change. They must choose to change. So we call it 3-stage sentencing. Stage 1, once they're incarcerated, they must engage in work in prison. Whether it's in the kitchen or the laundry or cleaning, they must engage in some form of work in prison. Stage 2 is every offender gets an individualised education program. So many of the people incarcerated have fetal alcohol syndrome. They have really poor numeracy and literacy. So you actually have to give them a program that's achievable for them, that gives them a goal to work to, but it's achievable. For some, it might be a degree or diploma. If they're super intelligent, it'll probably be a trade. But what you're doing is you're giving them a target that they have to attain towards. No one else can do it for them. Okay? For so many, other people have done everything for them. They've never been personally responsible. You're teaching them personal responsibility. They must want it. They must step up to the plate, and then they can change. Once they've achieved that goal, it's open prison. That means where they're working outside of prison during the day and incarcerated at night. The idea behind that is they're getting work skills. They're rubbing shoulders with people that aren't incarcerated. They're talking to people that might be going to touch rugby on Wednesday with their kids, that are planning a trip over to, I don't know, down to Queenstown or whatever, that are doing up their house, okay? It's aspirational, it's inspirational, it's real world what's happening outside of prison. So instead of just always being locked up, only talking to the people that are also locked up, they're actually finding out what life is like outside. It's aspirational, it's inspirational, it gives them hope, and it also gives them the tools they need. It's the relationships outside of prison. It's the work skills, it's the work connections. You're actually doing whatever you can to provide them the hope for tomorrow, the future for them. But you're putting a line in the sand and saying, we will do everything we can to help you, but you must want to change. Because if they refuse to change, they refuse to engage in work, they refuse to fulfill their education requirements, they don't get out. That's their choice. You're not taking the choice away from them, you're not locking them up forever, but you're saying to them, you have no right to create more victims. We will do everything we can to help you, but you must choose to change. That's our justice policy.
You spoke about personal responsibility, and I just wanted to throw this out there. That's such a crucial element in the success of the All Blacks team. In talking to Inga, he shared an acronym with me that when he was an All Black back in the days with Michael Jones and Ronnie Clark, personal responsibility was part of it because they were taught pride. You need to have pride in the jersey and pride in what you represent. And he says the pride that they were taught, other than the acronym of TEAM, which is Together Everyone Achieves More, every All Black at the time was taught about personal responsibility in delivering excellence. PRIDE. And yet when you say that, as a nation, we know how to succeed. I mean, we've got the best rugby team in the world, other than the last World Cup, which South Africa won, but we're not going there. But yet, when it comes to practical, outworkings in society, that personal responsibility is taken away, if I hear you correctly. And, people are being patted on the back and said, it's okay to be where you are, rather than giving up or giving them that hand up. So on that note, another question? Yes, Clive. Is Clive allowed to ask a question?
Now I'm scared. You go for it.
So, typically, like when someone gets into a new position and stuff like that, they set out a 100-day plan. If you went into Parliament and you had the ability to magic wand a 100-day plan, what would be the key things that you think this nation should be addressing?
A 100-day plan really has to be focused, I really believe at the moment, on financial recovery from COVID, because what I don't want to leave is for my grandchildren and children is a massive debt that they've got to service and no way out of it. So what we want to do is enable people to actually be able to succeed in their businesses. And part of that has got to be reducing the amount of compliance that's involved in any business. Because compliance slows you down. The more time you spend doing paperwork, not doing your core business, the less core business you do, the less money you can generate. And so making it easier to employ people, making the Employment Relations Act a wee bit easier, bringing back the 90-day trials, but making it easier. Small businesses understand that their employees are their business. And no small business wants to let a good employee go. You just don't. You have to have them. They're the ones that are your business. They are your success. And so, but also on the flip side of it, small businesses understand that a bad employee can destroy your business. So in my business of building, if anything goes wrong, it's my fault. It's my responsibility. I have to pay for it. Doesn't matter who did it. It's my fault. And that's the same for a whole lot of small businesses. So it's unfair to insist that a small business has to keep someone on who is actually destroying their business, because they've either got to go bankrupt or withdraw, and we don't want that. So making compliance a lot easier, removing the red tape, making the RMA transparent instead of so subjective. Those are really important. Actually putting a limit on immigration. Why do I say that? Because actually, when you have a lot of immigration, you haven't got enough housing, you're exasperating the problem. And we've been saying this for 4 years now. The first part of a housing solution has got to be net zero immigration. We have got to stop mass immigration to allow our housing stock to come up, because otherwise we're simply inviting people to come around and stay when we haven't got enough beds for them. Anyone that immigrates here has enough money to support themselves. They have to come. But that means they've got enough money to get the house, which means the people that will miss out, if there's one house and 2 families going for it, the people that miss out are poor New Zealanders. So we really do need to address the housing, and the first part of that is going to be limiting immigration, and the second part is going to be making the whole housing process a whole lot easier. So for us, our 100-day plan is, 1, get democracy as being binding, with our binding referenda. 2 is repealing the Abortion Act and put it back so that people of New Zealand get a say on it, rather than the government dictating how our society looks. And then it's got to be reviewed. We've got to review the legislation that's been brought in the last 10 or 15 years to see if it's actually fit for purpose, if it has achieved the goals it was brought in for. And if it hasn't, scrap it. Because why should we have all these laws that have been brought in that have not worked? They simply make it harder for us. We want to see people released to do what they're passionate about. If you're a builder, be passionate about building. If you're a teacher, actually let teachers teach. Instead of having to write out reports about what they're going to teach and how they're going to teach it and how they taught it and what results they got, actually just let them teach. Trust them to use their professionalism, use their skills and their passion to teach well. Have a goal set them for by the end of the year, but release them to do what they're passionate about. So it's not exactly a 100-year plan, but we've got a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Well, I can speak personally to that there, because having been away to South Africa for a holiday for 7 years and coming back last year, the housing situation was astronomical. I mean, we sat waiting as a New Zealand citizen and all of that. We waited so long. The lines and just the applications that we had to go through. I mean, luckily we had friends that put us up for a short while till we got our rental. But it's diabolical. And then you mentioned about teachers. I mean, you gave a talk a few weeks ago, and I put a comment on your post, and I said, "Thank you for letting teachers teach." You know, and it had a few likes on it, because even now getting back into teaching, I mean, there's so much of red tape, there's so much of bureaucracy. I mean, for me as a teacher, before I start the lesson, you know, I've got to do so much of ticking the boxes, and I'm going to do so much of other things. Now I find that there's an extra box in my lesson plan, which is coming to a question that I had on my Facebook, which Bernadette and I were attacked with on Facebook from one of my friends, where he labeled us as racist. And he scrolled BLM on Bernadette's board on the side. And I said, wow, that's so cool. Bernadette loves Messi, you know, but there was just one subject that was there. And I replied to this guy, and I'm like, hey, mate, you know, have you seen Bernadette's complexion? You know, black. Am I missing something? I know I said half black, but half black lives matter as well. You know? and he labeled us as racist, and I had a chat with him on a private message, and I'm like, man, what are you saying? Why are you calling us the racists for supporting new conservatives? And for me as a teacher, now I've got an extra box on my lesson plan that I've got to cater for a specific culture. And I'm saying, but hold on, aren't we a democracy? So, pretty pair thrown at you. Would you be able to talk on that lines there? Are we racist?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm really old, but I thought racism was when you treated people differently because of the colour of their skin. That was my understanding of what racism was.
That's right.
Yeah, well, and maybe we're wrong, because someone's grabbed that word and reworded it to say racism is, if you're white, you're a racist. You know, just automatically that's what you are. And I don't think that's true. I think as a party, we're saying we want everyone treated equally. There should be no special treatment. I think that's that great quote, isn't it? I want my children to be judged on the quality of their character, not the colour of their skin. And so I don't think anyone in New Zealand should be treated special because of the colour of their skin. We should be treating people equally because they can all achieve in New Zealand. That's a beautiful thing. You've come here as an immigrant to New Zealand and succeeded in New Zealand because you can here. That's the beautiful thing. And I think as soon as we tell people you can't succeed here because of some reason, we're condemning them to failure. We don't want to condemn them to failure. We want them to succeed. And so I believe success is available for everyone in New Zealand, but I think we all need to be under the same law. I don't think we can have different rules for different people. I see that as divisive and not bringing us together. I don't think a divided nation actually works. It's a comment I've had from so many South Africans that have said a divided nation just does not work. We need to be together, and we need to develop the laws of New Zealand together as a people. That's great, but we all need to be under the same law. I don't see success for us as a nation any other way.
Okay, lovely. Are we okay? We've got time for one more question? Yep. One more question? Okay, one more question.
He's smiling so much, I think this one should be for Elliot, but anyway.
Well, I took my wife out to the movies the other night, and we got there, and she really hadn't planned ahead, and it was totally booked out, the whole cinema. So we then went off to the pub, where it was totally booked out, and waited a little bit. This afternoon, I took my wife to Kmart, which you should never do with your wife, and I'm also a pastor, and I can't take my church to church. What does the New Conservatives say to that?
Oh, yes.
Okay, that's a great question. I guess that's where it comes to freedom and safety, isn't it? So we've said as a party for quite some time now that we cannot as a nation eliminate COVID. We're not going to eliminate it because we don't control it. COVID is right around the world. We're a tiny island nation, and the only way we can restrict it is if we lock all our borders totally solid, which we're not going to do. So we are never going to eliminate COVID. So in the health and safety matrix, you start with elimination. If you can't do that, the next thing is minimisation. And that's what we have to understand as a nation. We just got to minimise it. And minimise it is looking after each other, a little bit of social distancing, really good hygiene, staying home if you're sick. But otherwise, life has got to carry on. You know, we could ban anyone off the roads and say, I saved your life. We've had no road deaths. But actually, we need to live. We could ban anyone from working and say, no one's had a work accident. But actually, we need to live. And it's the same with sports or anything else. So we've got to understand, yes, COVID is nasty. There's people that have died from it. But actually, it is something that is going to go through. We must learn to live with it. Protect our vulnerable, protect our elderly. But I think it's a freedom of choice issue. If you have people that are willing to come to your church and want to come to your church, they should be allowed to choose to do so. Because that is free choice. We shouldn't be restricted in that way. Testing, absolutely. Do testing to make sure we're not spreading disease. We want to look after our health. The reality is we've spent $50 billion trying to eliminate something we can't eliminate. Imagine if we'd spent that $50 billion, which we wouldn't have done, even 10% of it. Imagine if we'd given $5 billion to the health department. We'd have a world-class health system now that would be really unable to do anything. But instead, we spent $50 billion with very little to show for it. And that is a scary thing for us as a nation, because all we've done is actually delay the fact that COVID is going to come through. Yep. So good hygiene, personal responsibility, look after the vulnerable, but actually allow people freedom of choice.
We're going to take a short break because we can end the Facebook Live right now. A round of applause for Leighton.
Thank you.
So we have